In 2019, Spanish authorities intercepted something that shouldn't exist, a fully functional submarine built in a jungle, crossing the Atlantic Ocean with 3 tons of cocaine. No naval shipyard, no government contract, just cartel engineers, Russian blueprints, and a profit margin worth dying for. How did criminal organizations master technology that took nation-states decades to develop? The vessel was spotted approximately 900 nautical miles off the Galician coast, riding low in the water, its hull barely visible against the Atlantic swells. Spanish and Portuguese naval units closed in, tracking the submarine as it attempted to complete a journey that had begun weeks earlier, somewhere along the northern coast of South America. When boarding teams finally secured the craft, they found 3 crew members, emaciated and disoriented, surrounded by watertight packages containing 3 metric tons of cocaine. The street value exceeded $100 million. The submarine itself, constructed from fiberglass and reinforced with lead ballast, measured roughly 65 feet in length. It had crossed an ocean. It had evaded satellite surveillance, maritime patrols, and coordinated international interdiction efforts. And it had been built, according to intelligence analysts, in a jungle clearing using hand tools, generators, and expertise borrowed from former naval engineers. This was not the first narco-submarine, but it was the first to successfully cross the Atlantic. And it represented the culmination of nearly 3 decades of iterative design, operational refinement, and ruthless cost-benefit analysis. To understand how cartels achieved this capability, you have to go back to the beginning, to a small island in the Caribbean, and to a moment when desperation forced innovation. In 1993, Colombian authorities discovered a strange vessel on San Andres Island, a Colombian territory in the Western Caribbean. The craft was 23 feet long, constructed from wood and fiberglass, and designed to sit just below the waterline. It had no sophisticated navigation systems, no periscope, no air conditioning. It was, by any measure, primitive, but it was also functional. Intelligence analysts estimated it could carry between 1 and 2 tons of cocaine at a speed of roughly 7 knots. It was the first known narco-submarine. The context for its creation was simple: enforcement pressure. Throughout the late 1980s and early 1990s, Colombian cartels, particularly the Medellin and Cali organizations, had relied on go-fast boats to transport cocaine from Colombia to Central America and Mexico, where it would be smuggled overland into the United States. These boats were effective, capable of speeds exceeding 50 knots, but they were also visible. Radar technology improved, aerial surveillance expanded, interdiction rates climbed. The cartels needed a solution. They needed to disappear. The San Andres submarine was that solution, or at least the prototype. It was not designed to travel long distances or carry massive payloads. It was designed to evade detection, and in that narrow operational mandate, it succeeded. The vessel could submerge to a depth of a few feet, reducing its radar cross-section to nearly 0. It could travel slowly, conserving fuel, avoiding the high-speed signatures that attracted patrol aircraft. It was, in essence, a proof of concept. And once the concept was proven, the cartels began to scale. To understand why cartels invested in submarine technology, you have to understand the economics. A narco-submarine, depending on its size and sophistication, costs between $1 and $2 million to construct. This includes materials, labor, and the bribes necessary to secure construction sites in remote jungle areas. The cocaine it carries, however, is worth exponentially more. 3 tons of cocaine purchased in Colombia at roughly $2,000 per kilogram costs approximately $6 million. That same cocaine, once transported to the United States or Europe, sells for $30,000 to $40,000 per kilogram. 3 tons, therefore, generates between $90 and $120 million in revenue. Even accounting for losses, interdiction, and operational costs, the profit margin is staggering. A single successful voyage pays for the submarine 10 times over. And if the submarine is intercepted, the loss is acceptable. The cartels simply build another. This is the logic of asymmetric warfare. The state invests billions in radar systems, patrol boats, and international cooperation. The cartels invest millions in disposable submarines. The state must succeed every time. The cartels only need to succeed occasionally, and the ocean is vast. But building a submarine, even a primitive one, requires expertise. It requires knowledge of hydrodynamics, ballast systems, propulsion, and navigation. It requires welding, fiberglass layup, and diesel engine maintenance. Where did the cartels find this expertise? The answer, according to intelligence reports and court documents, is collaboration. In 2010, Colombian authorities arrested Harold Mauricio Poveda, a mid-level operative with ties to the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, known as FARC. Under interrogation, Poveda revealed details of a partnership between FARC, which controlled vast swaths of Colombian jungle territory, and Mexican cartels, particularly the Sinaloa organization. FARC provided territory and security for submarine construction. The Mexican cartels provided funding and distribution networks, and both organizations hired engineers. Some of these engineers were Colombian, trained in legitimate shipbuilding or mechanical engineering programs, then recruited through a combination of financial incentives and coercion. Others, according to intelligence analysts, were foreign. Reports emerged of Russian naval engineers, former submariners who had left the Russian Navy after the collapse of the Soviet Union, offering their services to the highest bidder. These reports remain partially unverified, but the sophistication of later submarine designs suggests that someone with formal training was involved. The cartels did not invent submarine technology, they imported it. Construction sites were established in remote areas of Ecuador, Brazil, and Guyana, locations chosen for their proximity to rivers that allowed submarines to be launched discreetly, and for their distance from government oversight. Workers lived on site, often for months, assembling vessels in jungle clearings using generators, hand tools, and materials transported overboard from legitimate supply chains. The process was iterative. Early designs failed. Hulls cracked, engines flooded, crews suffocated. But each failure informed the next design. The cartels treated submarine development like a research and development program, testing prototypes, refining specifications, and scaling production. Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, the leader of the Sinaloa cartel, was among the first to recognize the strategic value of submarines. Court documents from his 2019 trial in New York included testimony from former associates who described Guzman's personal involvement in commissioning submarine construction, reviewing designs, and calculating cost-benefit ratios. He understood that submarines were not just transportation, they were insurance. They were a hedge against interdiction, and they were a signal to competitors and law enforcement alike. The Sinaloa cartel could innovate faster than the state could respond. By 2010, the technology had matured. In that year, Ecuadorian authorities, acting on intelligence from the United States Drug Enforcement Administration, raided a construction site deep in the Ecuadorian jungle. What they found was extraordinary. The submarine measured 100 feet in length, constructed entirely from fiberglass with a conning tower, a periscope, and an air conditioning system to keep the crew and cargo cool during the voyage. It had a range of approximately 2,000 miles and could carry up to 10 tons of cocaine. It was fully submersible, capable of traveling beneath the surface for extended periods, and it had been built in a jungle, miles from the nearest road, using materials transported by river. The design was sophisticated. The hull was reinforced with lead ballast to control buoyancy. The propulsion system used a diesel engine for surface travel and an electric motor for submerged operations, minimizing noise and heat signatures. The navigation system included GPS, allowing the crew to plot courses with precision. And the submarine included scuttling mechanisms, valves that could be opened to flood the hull and sink the vessel in minutes, destroying evidence and preventing seizure. This was no longer a prototype. This was an operational platform designed for repeated use, capable of evading detection by even the most advanced interdiction systems. And it was not unique. Intelligence analysts estimated that by 2010, cartels were constructing between 50 and 100 submarines per year, most of them semi-submersibles that traveled just below the waterline, but an increasing number fully submersible. The operational tradecraft was equally refined. Submarines typically carried a crew of 3 to 4 people, a pilot, a navigator, a mechanic, and sometimes a guard. The journey from Colombia to Mexico or from Colombia to West Africa and then to Europe could take weeks. Conditions aboard were brutal. The interior was cramped, often no more than 5 feet in height, forcing crew members to crouch or crawl. Diesel fumes filled the cabin. Temperatures soared. Food and water were rationed. Crew members urinated and defecated in buckets. Many developed respiratory infections, dehydration, and psychological breakdowns. Some did not survive the journey, but the cartels did not care. Crew members were expendable. They were recruited from the lowest tiers of the organization, often young men with no other economic prospects, promised a few $1,000s for a single voyage. If they succeeded, they were paid. If they were arrested, they were abandoned. If they died, they were replaced. The submarines, not the people, were the valuable asset. In 2020, Colombian authorities seized a submarine that represented the next phase of evolution. This vessel was powered entirely by batteries, allowing it to remain submerged for up to 12 hours without surfacing. It had a cargo capacity of 6 tons and was equipped with a sophisticated ballast system that allowed the crew to adjust depth with precision. The submarine had been designed for coastal operations, traveling beneath the surface in shallow waters where sonar detection was difficult, then surfacing briefly to recharge batteries and take on air before submerging again. The shift toward battery power was significant. Diesel engines, while effective, produced heat and noise, both of which could be detected by patrol aircraft equipped with infrared sensors and sonar buoys. Battery-powered submarines were quieter, cooler, and harder to track. They represented a direct response to improvements in interdiction technology. The cartels were not just building submarines. They were engaged in an arms race, adapting their designs in real time to counter state capabilities. But the most significant innovation came later, and it did not involve crew members at all. In 2022, Spanish authorities seized a series of underwater drones off the coast of Galicia. Each drone was roughly 6 feet in length, powered by an electric motor, and capable of carrying 200 kilograms of cocaine. The drones were pre-programmed with GPS coordinates, allowing them to navigate autonomously from a mothership to a designated pickup point near the Spanish coast. They traveled submerged at depths of up to 50 meters and surfaced only when they reached their destination. There was no crew, no human risk, no possibility of interrogation or testimony. This was the unmanned paradigm, and it was only the beginning. In July 2025, the Colombian Navy intercepted an unmanned submarine operated by the Gulf Clan, one of Colombia's most powerful criminal organizations. The vessel was equipped with a Starlink satellite system, allowing operators to monitor its position in real time and adjust its course remotely. It had a cargo capacity of 1.5 tons and was designed for fully autonomous operation. The submarine could be launched from a coastal site, programmed with a destination, and left to navigate on its own, transmitting periodic updates to a control center hundreds or thousands of miles away. If interdicted, it could be scuttled remotely, destroying evidence and preventing seizure. The use of Starlink was particularly significant. Starlink, a satellite internet constellation operated by SpaceX, provides global coverage, including over oceans and remote areas where traditional communication infrastructure does not exist. By equipping submarines with Starlink terminals, cartels gained the ability to maintain constant communication with their vessels, adjusting routes to avoid patrol zones, coordinating with surface vessels for cargo transfers, and monitoring weather conditions in real time. It was a level of operational sophistication that rivaled, and in some cases exceeded, the capabilities of state navies. The Gulf Clan, along with other organizations like the National Liberation Army, known as ELN, and the Oliver Sinistera Front, had become leaders in unmanned submarine development. These groups operated in the dense jungles of Colombia's Pacific coast, areas where government presence was minimal and where rivers provided natural highways for transporting materials and launching vessels. They employed specialists, individuals with backgrounds in engineering, electronics, and navigation, who were paid salaries comparable to those of mid-level professionals in legitimate industries. One such specialist, Oscar Moreno Ricardo, known as the King of Semi-Submersibles, was arrested in 2022 after years of evading capture. Intelligence reports suggested he had been involved in the construction of more than 30 submarines, each one more advanced than the last. The trend toward unmanned systems was driven by a simple calculus. Eliminating the crew eliminated the weakest link. Crew members could be arrested. They could cooperate with authorities. They could make mistakes. Unmanned submarines could not. They followed their programming with precision. They did not panic. They did not negotiate. And if they were lost, no one died. The cartels had solved the human problem by removing the human. For law enforcement, the challenge was existential. Detecting a semi-submersible, which traveled with only a foot or two of hull above the waterline, was difficult but possible. Patrol aircraft equipped with radar and infrared sensors could spot the heat signature of a diesel engine or the faint wake left by the vessel, but detecting a fully submersible or unmanned drone was exponentially harder. These vessels traveled beneath the surface, often at depths where sonar was ineffective, and they produced minimal noise and heat. The ocean, which covers more than 70% of the Earth's surface, became an operational sanctuary. Interdiction efforts relied heavily on intelligence. Informants, wiretaps, and surveillance of known construction sites provided leads. When a submarine was detected, coordinated operations involving multiple nations could be launched. In October 2024, the Mexican Navy, acting on intelligence from the United States, seized a vessel carrying 8.4 tons of cocaine, the largest single submarine bust on record. But for every submarine intercepted, intelligence analysts estimated that 3 to 5 others completed their voyages successfully. The cartels had built their strategy around acceptable loss. They assumed that a certain percentage of submarines would be seized. They factored this into their cost projections. A 30% interdiction rate, which would be considered a success by law enforcement standards, still meant that 70% of shipments reached their destinations, and 70% of $100 million was more than enough to justify continued investment. But there was a human cost that no economic model could capture: the crew members who suffocated in flooded hulls, the coastal communities in Colombia, Ecuador, and Mexico that were terrorized by cartel enforcers protecting construction sites, the addicts in New York, Madrid, and Sydney, whose dependencies were fueled by the cocaine that made it through, the violence in Sinaloa, Medellin, and Culiacan, funded by the profits from successful submarine runs. The submarines were marvels of engineering, but they were also instruments of destruction, and the destruction radiated outward, touching lives far removed from the jungle clearings where the vessels were built. The cartels had demonstrated that non-state actors, driven by profit and unconstrained by law, could innovate faster than governments. They had turned the ocean into a highway, the jungle into a shipyard, and satellite technology into a logistics tool. They had recruited engineers, bribed officials, and built supply chains that spanned continents. They had created a system that was resilient, adaptive, and ruthlessly efficient. And the system continued to evolve. Each seizure provided law enforcement with intelligence, but it also provided the cartels with feedback. They studied what went wrong. They refined their designs. They tested new materials, new propulsion systems, new communication protocols. They were not deterred by failure. They were informed by it. The question, then, is not whether cartels can build submarines. They can, and they have, and they will continue to do so as long as the profit margin justifies the investment. The question is what? It means when criminal organizations possess capabilities that were once the exclusive domain of nation-states. What does it mean when a jungle factory can produce a vessel that crosses an ocean undetected? What does it mean when the tools of war, of espionage, of strategic deterrence are available to anyone with enough money and enough desperation? And what does it mean when the response, despite billions spent on interdiction, despite international cooperation, despite technological superiority, is always reactive, always one step behind, always chasing shadows across an ocean too vast to patrol? The submarines will keep coming. The drones will keep launching. The engineers will keep refining. And the cocaine will keep flowing because the demand has not disappeared and the profit has not diminished. And the cartels have learned that innovation, not force, is the ultimate weapon. Is interdiction futile when the economics favor infinite iteration? Can a war be won when the enemy treats loss as overhead and adapts faster than the state can respond? And who pays the cost when brilliance is placed in service of destruction? Share your thoughts below.